Greetings. Welcome to the How We Do Digital Ministry podcast. I'm Christopher Harris. I'm the founder of Faith Growth. You can find us online at faithgrowth.com, where we help our church clients build their digital presence and engage with their communities online. On this podcast, I have a conversation with a church leader and ask them to share how they do digital ministry in their community. Today, I am talking with the Reverend David Hansen. He is the pastor of Spirit of Joy. Literally, joy. There's an exclamation point there. Lutheran Church in the Woodlands, Texas. Pastor David, please introduce yourself and tell us how you do digital ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Christopher. So my name is David Hansen. I serve Spirit of Joy in the Woodlands. I've been here for 8 years. I've been a pastor for 15. I got started in digital ministry, a decade ago, more. When there were like 5 of us online doing ministry. When I first started in the parish in 2006, I did this amazing thing. I created a MySpace page for my congregation, right? Like, because there was nobody there. And MySpace was a thing in 2006. Since then, I've just been learning the tools and sharing what I learned with people along the way. I've had the opportunity to work as a consultant, as a speaker, as an instructor, in helping people to get connected. In my congregation, that looks like, especially now, we're committed to having parallel overlapping communities. We have an online community and we have an in-person community. And some of those people participate in both, and some are only in one or in the other. And we were headed that direction before, but the pandemic and the opportunity to move everything online helped make clear to us the number of people that we reached. So for us, it's become important to keep those people connected to our community, in not this community that replaces our online community, but runs parallel to it, and there's sort of a permeable barrier between them, right? So we've got people who participate in person who also participate in online Bible studies, and people who first came to us through online Bible studies who are now coming to in-person events when we have them. And so there's this flow back and forth. And then we have people who live in faraway places like Dallas who are never going to make it here, but we love them anyway. That's been where we're at now. And it's been fun to watch that grow as an online part of our ministry. So we see our ministry as a way of connecting more deeply with our local community, as well as reaching farther than we ever could without those digital tools.
I like the way you're looking at it as 2 parallel communities that, kind of impermeable wall. They're going to participate in both. They're not isolated,
right?
But that you do, what I like about that image is that you're not putting necessarily a preference on one type of community over the other. It's the parallel, and it's what is best for you. I assume your mentality is what is best for you is where you should participate.
Yeah, absolutely. And we unlike some other congregations, we've had an extended time out of our building because of the winter freeze back in February. Yeah. So we're still out of our building, not because of coronavirus, but because of that. And so we've had an added 6 months onto our exodus from the building. And so it's given us this opportunity to think about this and how this works. It's been a nice unintentional pause for us.
Yeah, y'all just didn't rush back to the building because you could, but you had more time for discernment, I guess.
Yeah, we really did, and to figure out how to do it well. And I've been appreciative of that time because we're able to think more about being intentional about, let's go beyond just, setting a camera on a tripod or an iPhone on a tripod and recording the service. Let's think about how we can record it in a way that it's unobtrusive to those who are in person, but also feels personal and relational to those who are not. And that's been the key element to me for my online ministry since I started it, is moving beyond the idea of how do I broadcast my message to more people and into the social aspect, leading into the social media. How do we use these tools to help us to build relationships? And that's always been my number one goal. Is helping, because as churches we get caught in that broadcast thing, right? I want more people to know about our potluck dinner, right? Instead of, how do I connect with someone and learn about them while they learn about me as we grow in relationship?
Yeah, well, and realizing, I mean, for you it's old hand because you've been at it that long, but I think a lot of our churches finally realized what you and I have both known since the 2000s was that this digital really can facilitate those relationships and building those relationships, especially the initializing piece, the beginning part. And so that's, I guess, as y'all are saying that, or as you're saying, hey, I really want to focus on that, what maybe tips or tricks might you have for other churches? Because the thing I'm hearing right now is, okay, we got people watching, how do we connect with them? Or attending services online, I should say.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think there are a couple of different ways. And the question to ask is exactly that. How do I build a relationship? How do I use these tools to build a relationship? There are ways to reach out to people who watch your online service. For us, whether or not it's best practices, it's what we do and it's working for us. I'll usually reach out via Facebook Messenger from the page of the church, because you can message people from the page if they've commented. So if someone comments regularly, I'll reach out in the same way I would if they have come to worship and left their contact info. Right? So commenting is sort of like leaving your contact info. It's leading a trail back to your Facebook profile. And it's not creepy because it's not from my personal account. It's not, here's this stranger reaching out to me. It's, here's this page that I've interacted with messaging me. And so I message a spirit of joy and say, it's great to have you in worship. Here's my contact info. If you'd like to know more about us, I'd love to have a conversation with you. If I can tell that they're local, I'll reach out and offer to go and grab a cup of coffee with them if they're comfortable with that. And I'll share, if you give me your email, I'll put you on our mailing list. I also regularly put in our service notes the link to sign up for our weekly email, so that they can stay connected in that way. Again, that's sort of broadcast, but it starts the conversation and it gives me their email address. So once they've signed up for that list, I'll reach out to them from my email and I'll send them an email and say, hey, I'm Pastor David. Thanks for signing up for our email list. Here's a little bit about me. I would love to get to know about you. And so for me, it's all about opening that door to the second conversation.
So I like that. And I like that it's not just that while you are putting them on the master email list, so they get the announcements, which is one piece. I like that you're taking the time to do that personal email. And here's a little bit, more about the church, about me. Hey, who are you? Tell me a little bit more about, and I think that's an important, that's how it starts. It's like, and I think a lot of pastors or just church leaders in general don't realize we actually have a lot of systems for that. They're just kind of unwritten, in that a lot of that type of sharing would happen maybe on the way out the door at the shaking hands after the service, where you say, oh, you're here. Where are you from? Where, now online, we need to transfer that maybe to email or direct message, like you said.
Exactly.
But, and so it's, in one sense, learning how to use it with the new tools, but the procedure, if you will, we've been doing for years and years, connecting with people.
And I say that I message them through the page because there is a line of being a creeper, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, don't go stalk their profile and message them from your personal profile or ask your members to do that. Like, it's just, that's overstepping, right? Yeah. It's the difference between, being friendly and making visitors stand up the first time they come to worship, right? Like, you want to be welcoming without being overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so we've got to feel out, especially for people who aren't digital natives, we've got to feel out what those boundaries are. how do we make people feel welcome without overstepping the boundaries? And so for me, I really like the language of opening the door. So when they have commented or sent me their info, they've opened the door for me to reach out to them. Right.
Yeah, they've kind of stuck their hand up in a sense that
Yeah.
they had the option to really be anonymous, but they've put their hand up and said, "Oh, I was here," or
Right.
open the door. Yeah, open the door.
It's
Yeah.
the difference between the visitor who stops and talks to you after worship and the visitor who leaves before the closing hymn.
Exactly.
The visitor who leaves before the closing hymn, let them go. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
If they're going to come back, they'll come back. The visitor who stops and stop and talk to them and make them feel welcome and loved.
Now that is a very good comparison. I like that. And especially if they did say something, it probably is better that you say something back because they did try to start a conversation there.
That's right. And so then they've got my email, they've got my cell phone, and they know how to then reach out to me. So then it's on them. Right. And so part of what's really, to me, a good thing about that has come out of this pandemic is, I hope, a need for clergy and evangelists in our congregations to be aware of what the communication lines are and consent. Yes. Right? If you've given me your email, you've given me permission to email you.
Yes.
Right? Don't hug the stranger at worship that you've just met for the first time.
Yeah.
Unless they have said, "Hey, can I have a hug?" Right?
Yeah.
And so I think both as we come back to in-person worship, and there are some people who will be comfortable, I'm a church hugger, who will be comfortable getting a hug after worship. Other people are comfortable with a handshake, and others, none of the above. Yeah. And I think we're going to have to be more aware and mindful of that. The same with online.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly correct. Tell me a little if there is maybe an experience or an encounter that you've had or something you've witnessed of God at work online.
Yeah, I think a couple of things come to mind. But I think I'd share a couple of stories of folks who came and worshiped with us, who in their own congregation felt, what's the word I'm looking for, excluded. In their own congregation, in their home congregation, they felt less than. For a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And the reasons are unimportant, the theological discussion around that, but they felt less than in their home congregation. And they were able to encounter our online worship, just looking for a place where they could feel included, affirmed, and loved for who they are. Mm-hmm. And they experienced that first through just our online worship. And now these families are participating in other online opportunities we have. And they're relatively local. And so when we open the doors back up for in-person worship, I expect we'll meet them. And so these are people who are encountering through our online worship a deep sense of God's love for them as they are. Mm-hmm. That they would not have encountered any other way. They may or may not, it's a big step to go to worship at a church for the first time that you don't know.
Yes.
To pack up your family. I've always loved the advanced scout method where a family will send one family member who goes first to see if it's okay. And then the next Sunday, everybody comes, right? Because it's a lot of work to get everybody in the house, parents, children, grandparents, whoever else lives in the home with you, packed up on Sunday morning, relatively early, walking into a space you don't know, to see people you don't know, for an experience you don't know whether it's going to be an A, a B plus, a C experience, right?
Yeah.
Like if you know it's going to be an A plus experience, that's easy. But if you don't know what you're going to get out of it, it's hard to motivate to do that. And online worship gives us the opportunity for people to have this window into the in-person experience and into the heart of our congregation and how we proclaim the gospel, right? And so even if they never come in person, they experience the heart of the congregation and the proclamation of the gospel in that space.
See, that's what a lot of the churches I work with, one of the key things I always try to tell them, and this is what I love about digital, is that, hey, I believe XYZ church, you are unique and special in the pure fact that God has called together the group of people there to be the manifestation of the body of Christ at XYZ church of Jesus.
Right.
And so what I love about online is it allows that uniqueness that God's called together in that place. And for y'all, Spirit of Joy, to now, you don't have to change. You don't have to do anything. You literally are going to be yourself and be who God has called you to be. And now the geography gets necessary. Well, not just geography, because it could be people down the road, but it allows you another way to connect, and what that awesomeness is that God has called together. And geography is not necessarily, or hey, it's hard to get everybody. Your example of just getting out the door on Sunday morning is not easy. And so now people get to experience that and experience what kind of in a sense what God is known and what God has called together. And to me, that's an exciting piece of getting online and sharing that. It's like you don't have to do anything different but be who God has called you to be. Anyways, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, be who you called to be, and what that does is that opens the door for those who need it to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
Those who need it and want it, and with the amount of time that I've been doing online ministry, I have had people reach out to me, sure, with prayer requests. I had I dealt with many years ago a suicidal crisis. Someone reached out to me a couple of states away, and I was able to reach out to a clergy person in their neighborhood who knew them, who could then follow up and make sure that they were okay. Because of my online presence, this person felt comfortable reaching out to me in their need. And it's, we often think of it as this, border wall between the online and the in-person community, the online and the incarnate community. And it's just not. There's always this back and forth swing between those things, where what we do online and who we are online influences then the relationships we're able to have on person, and the relations we have in person help shape who we are and the relationships we have online. Mm-hmm. And it's we use the phrase, I hate the phrase, IRL, in real life. We incarnate relationships that exists online. And we are incarnational. There's something about being in person that makes a difference.
We still crave that. Online
absolutely.
Replace it.
Yeah. But our presence online helps to shape and bring us deeper into those relationships.
Yeah, it enhances, and for me personally, it's opened me up to some relationships I never would have found.
Absolutely. Well, and even it's even the little things. As you know, I'm a divorced parent, and my daughter is with us part-time. When she's not with us, I FaceTime with her multiple times a day. I'm involved in her daily life in a way that I can see and participate, thanks to the gift of technology. And that's an online relationship too. We just think of social media, but all that stuff is online. And same with my members, as we've been separate from one another. I've got Bible studies and discussion groups that meet weekly. And so I'm able to connect with the daily lives of these people, which is how you build relationships, right? Those daily interactions are the building blocks. The mundane are the building blocks that get us to the deepness of relationship.
Yeah. No, I love that, because it really is about the relationship. And that's, the technology in and of itself is not the end. It is how it enables us to start those relationships and to share, that love of Christ and that story of Christ.
Exactly.
So tell me, because you're one that not only has practiced this in your church, I know that you've been very intentional of offering help to other church leaders as they're looking to go digital. What are, and as the pandemic is winding down, what are maybe some tips that you would offer fellow church leaders as they're looking at kind of what's next?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to be intentional about what we're doing and why. Don't rush back.
I like
We're
that.
we're rushing back to get back to normal, but maybe normal wasn't so great. And there's going to be a new normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we've got folks who, frankly, worshiping online was great for them, whether because of young children that are hard to get out of the house, or health needs for those who are immune compromised, or the church building is 45 minutes to an hour away, and we love the service, but that's a lot to travel, an hour and a half, 2 hours on a Sunday. We've got folks that are going to continue to opt for online options, maybe not every Sunday, but often enough. And so how do we continue to include them in meaningful ways? How do we continue to reach the people who live outside of our geographical area with the good news of Jesus? Because we believe it's life-changing. And for whatever reason, they've connected with us. How do we take what we were doing for the year of the pandemic and integrate it with who we want to be? And I think the question that's more important than what we used to do and who we were is, who do we want to be?
To be, yes. And where are we being called?
Yeah.
Well, I think, kind of this not just rush back, to me, the important thing that it allows for is a reevaluation of resources. Because if we just kind of rush back and it's like, oh, but we're going to keep doing hybrid, then you're just going to burn out a lot of our church leaders, because doing online is not necessarily easy. And doing in person is not necessarily easy. And then if we're going to pull back Sunday school in person and pull back, every mission opportunity, it's like, hey, we're just going to flip a switch and, go back to September, like September 2021 needs to look like September 2019, if you will. And if that's what our mind is, then we're just going to burn out our leadership. But if we're really listening, where should we move and who do we want to grow into, then it allows for reassessment of resources that allow for online to continue and grow, as well as in person. Or at least this is I don't know. I think you saw this is kind of my interpretation. I think you saw that Nadia Bowles-Weber tweet that went around recently where she's just saying, I interpreted it more that our pastors are just tired and we need to be intentional what we ask them to do. I know some people are like, and for everybody out there, I should say, she just tweeted that asking pastors to do in person and online is a bit much. And a lot of people kind of took issue because we have to. And I was like, I think it's a matter of, we have to realize there's finite resources, and just running back is not necessarily the best, but how are we going to allocate those resources and our staff and their time? And I'd love
there are, and I think that's I think what she was trying to say is probably more nuanced than can fit into a tweet, because it rubbed me a little bit the wrong way too, frankly. I agree with her sentiment, especially in small churches and churches that have a church young pastor. A church young pastor is anyone younger than 50, right? And someone who knows technology a little bit. A lot of us have wound up being the chief technology officer, in addition to being the pastor. For example, at our church, most of the equipment we're using came out of my personal stash right now, and I know how to set it up and make it go, and so I do. And it can work when I'm not there, but it's easier if I just if I press the buttons.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is we're thinking about how do we transition to a more permanent, sustainable model.
Yeah.
And I think that's the question. Not do we continue doing both, but how do we do both in a sustainable way? And so we're installing a new system that volunteers can more easily run. That isn't running on my equipment, that is running on, a system that's kind of plug and play, and you sit down at this desk and you follow these instructions and it goes, right? So that it's sustainable. And so how do we take these things that our pastors did because they're passionate and care about our ministry and they wanted to keep ministry happening over the last year? And how do we switch it to a more sustainable, permanent solution?
I love that question. Because probably one of the biggest things, I had the opportunity twice now to lead a Zoom webinar on websites for 2 different synods in the ELCA. And before I got started, I just asked them questions to put in the chat, just kind of how, where you're at, what are you most concerned about digital ministry? And probably the biggest concern that I keep hearing is that I've heard on both of those was just like, not having enough volunteers, doing it all alone and all of that. And so I think you're right. If we, hey, yeah, most pastors stepped in because that was what had to happen. And so now how do we systematize that so that then we can bring the volunteer in to start doing it with you as opposed to you doing it yourself. I like what your strategy there.
Yeah, well, and which is going to require our congregations to say that this is important to us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It might take money.
Shudder the thought.
Right? No, but it might take money to create a system that was not in place before. Most of our churches, especially our smaller churches, didn't have a system for this before. We threw up a temporary solution in March of 2020, and maybe we fine-tuned it over the last year. But now's the time to say, this is a priority to us, and we're going to invest in it so that we can continue to have a solution. And if we're not going to invest in it, then don't do it.
Exactly. Yeah. Because you're just going to burn yourself out. And after about a year, you're going to go, well, this isn't work. You're going to go, it isn't, because you really didn't invest in it. You'll go, this isn't working. And so, all right. One last question, and then we'll have to wrap it up. But what do you kind of think the church looks like in 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah, I guess my first response is I don't know. I don't know because, who would have envisioned what we saw happen in the last year?
Yeah.
And that really nudged the church into a new direction, which we were headed, but it pushed us further down the path for a lot of churches. I think a lot of churches jumped 5 years in their online presence in the last year because of necessity, and we had to. And that's great, and I'm grateful for it. But who knows what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? And I'm really intentional about that. I think for me, we're seeing. There are 10 different ways to answer this question too, right? Because you've got to deal with I think the ideological landscape of our country is changing and has changed over the last 3 to 5 years. And that reality is getting played out in churches now. And I think the pandemic escalated that for a lot of churches.
Yeah.
I think a lot of churches are going to be dealing with conflict in the next 12 months.
Unfortunately, I think you're right on that one. Yeah.
We've dealt with a number of things in this pandemic that have heightened levels of conflict in churches. One is the level of stress on our leaders, discomfort with change that has been escalated in pace. Ideological divides getting further divided by the fact that we aren't able to see one another in person and mend those relationships. We've been in a time of crisis, and on the Gulf Coast here, we know that crisis often produces conflict. So as you come out of hurricane recovery or flood recovery, often after that, leaders burn out, whether lay or ordained. Conflict bubbles to the surface that has been underneath. And what we've seen has been a crisis played out nationally, internationally. And instead of happening over the, say, 3 weeks or 6 weeks that you might often see a disaster happen, this is played out over the course of a year. People are tired and itchy and cranky, and we're going to see it in our congregations. My hope is we come out healthier because of it. My hope for the church is that this brings some of the stuff that was under the surface and happening and keeping our churches sort of low level unhealthy has bubbled to the surface, and we'll actually deal with it.
Yeah.
And we'll come out through the other side of this conflict with a church that is healthier, clearer about who we are, and about how the power of gospel transforms communities and individuals. That's my hope.
Well, I think that's a great hope, and I think it's a great message of hope to end this podcast on. I want to say thank you, David, for being our guest on How We Do Digital Ministry. I appreciate your time today. Great conversation. I want to invite all of our listeners to like and follow us. So if you're on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, or if you follow us in your favorite podcast app. David, how can our listeners find and follow you online?
I am everywhere. So my website is digitalpastor.org, in case you were wondering how much I care about this stuff. Digitalpastor.org. From there, you can click on the links to find my Facebook, my Instagram, my Twitter, and all those things. That's the easiest way. I'm on Facebook as Pastor David Hansen. I'm on Twitter as Rev_David, but the fastest way is to go to digitalpastor.org and click on all the follow buttons there.
Well, I can attest to the fact that he does really care about this, so much so that he live streamed his wedding, 10 years ago, was it? I mean, before we were talking about live streaming worship.
9 years ago.
9
whole years.
9
whole years.
I was there, but I can't exactly remember the 9. Okay, 9 years. Okay.
9 years.
But still, 9 years ago, long before most churches were live streaming anything, you live streamed your wedding.
We did. And everybody thought it was the most unique and strange thing, didn't they?
Yes. And it was a lot of fun to help with that.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again for listening, everyone. We'd love to connect with you in other ways, too. I'd like you to ask to join our private Facebook group, cleverly titled How We Do Digital Ministry. The link is in the show notes. This is a place where the other 7 days in between episodes, you can discuss all things digital ministry, ask questions, share what's working, what's not working in your congregation. Until next week, peace and blessings to you all.